Mais alguém gostaria de dirigir uma pergunta ao nosso palestrante? Por gentileza. Ali está.
Obrigado, Bjorn, por sua palestra. Eu acho que ela mostra um framework muito importante que pode ser aplicado a qualquer problema brasileiro. Se nós conseguirmos abordar as questões dessa forma, ter a coragem para entender as duas versões da história, capaz que a gente consiga tomar decisões muito mais eficazes do que hoje. Mas a minha pergunta a você é um dilema brasileiro, mas eu acho que é mundial também, que é conciliar a questão ambiental com a questão do aumento da produtividade agrícola. Como você acabou de dizer, um dos maiores problemas a ser enfrentados é combater pobreza. E uma das coisas que mais reduz pobreza é comida barata, acessível às pessoas. Como você vê, no caso do Brasil especificamente, a expansão das fronteiras agrícolas versus a questão ambiental e, especificamente, a questão da Amazônia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll just briefly address your first concern, the idea that this would be a great way to organize thinking in Brazil. And obviously I would tend to agree with you, because that's the point that I try to bring forward, that you could actually imagine having a conference, and we've done this for Denmark, we've done this for Latin America actually with the Inter-American Development Bank, but I think it would be obvious to try to do for Brazil, essentially saying, all right, lots of problems. There's actually lots of documented solutions to how to fix the different problems in Brazil. Imagine asking, how much is it going to cost to fix each of these problems? And then have a public debate on where should you be spending this money? Because clearly you can't fix all of it right at the same time. Shouldn't you be fixing it where it's fairly cheap to fix it, and it would have great impacts, great opportunities to fix it first, rather than the places where you can spend a lot of money and do very little good? That, I think, would be a way to get the conversation moving forward. And again, of course, you have to remember that just because you do such an intellectual exercise doesn't mean, oh, everybody's just going to follow suit. But once you put the money, the price tags, if you will, on the different opportunities, it becomes a lot harder for politicians to say, I'm going to do the most expensive one that's going to do the least good first. So in that way, you at least make sure that the conversation becomes more rational. Now, with respect to your particular question, what do we do about agricultural productivity? I don't know what you do particularly about the Amazonian, and I would also say that's perhaps not for me to make that comment. But what we have to realize is that globally, most of the increase in productivity has not, as most people believe, come from expanding the area of agriculture. We've gone from about 10% of the world's land area to be agricultural area, up to about 11% over the last 50 years. And we're expecting it might go up to 11.6, maybe even 12%. So notice, we actually have almost the same amount of land, slightly more. The vast increase has come from more productivity. Basically, that we have pesticides, that we have artificial fertilizer, and mainly from improved hybrids. So again, we need to get people to realize that if you want to do something about feeding the world, and presumably we want that, it has to come from getting much better technologies. There's huge underinvestment in everything in Africa. We know that they're probably 4 times away from what the best practices could achieve in most areas in Africa. So we could make this a bread basket instead of a basket case, and that would be wonderful. So it's mostly about, and that's also why I pointed out that the 4th best priority is really on agricultural research and development. We tend to forget that, because we're well fed, but most people are not. Now in Brazil, I would also assume it's a question of saying, is the forest correctly priced? That is, do we have an understanding of what we're cutting down, and would we perhaps rather want to keep that? So that's a whole red discussion in the climate discussions. Should the rest of the world pay Brazil for not cutting down its rainforest? I certainly think that's part of the solution. It's probably not going to be the whole solution. And you also have to realize that, obviously, if you look at Europe, I mean, we cut down most of our forests, and we got rich in that process. So I think it's somewhat easy for the rest of the world to say, you shouldn't be doing it.
Temos mais alguma pergunta? Por gentileza.
Boa tarde. Você acha uma decisão inteligente o investimento que está sendo planejado na prospecção de petróleo em águas profundas?
Well, it was clearly not a smart thing what the BP did, but we are going to continue to do this. I think if what we're seeing, the oil spill in the Gulf, indicates that we need to have better security measures. We also need to remember that although it looks really bad right now, it's probably not going to have long-term effects. It has significant short-term effects, but we need to remember that we have precedents. The biggest oil spill, of course, is the Exxon Valdez in much more vulnerable waters in the Prince William Sound, and yet 10 years after, with huge scientific studies, it was shown that most of the damage had gone away and almost all of the natural ecosystems had gotten back to normal. Perhaps a more relevant indicator is the Iraq oil spill, or the Kuwait oil spill after the Iraq war in 1991, where Saddam Hussein let all the oil wells burn, and then later on had a huge oil spill about the size of 10 times of Exxon Valdez. It actually turned out that just 5 or 7 years after, almost all of the ecosystems were back. So we need to remember that the short-term impact is huge, and we need to get smarter at dealing with that, but the long-term impacts are probably not that big. That said, what this really shows is you're never going to get people to say, okay, I'm not going to drive my car. You know, if you don't have an alternative for the oil that you already have, you're going to say, drill me some more, even if it's dangerous, even if it's hard to get at. And that underscores the point that I think is somewhat naive in the whole environmental discussion, that, it's all about just making sure it becomes so expensive nobody wants to buy it. Listen, that's never going to get any political traction. You're never going to get politicians to go out and say, I voted for making gas so unaffordable for you that you can't go to your work. That's just not going to win. What you have to do instead is to say, I voted for much smarter, much cheaper investment in research and development, so that in 20 or 40 years, green energy is going to be so cheap that your kids and grandkids are going to want to have it, not because we force them, but because it's cheaper.
Ok, muito obrigado, Bjorn. We have no time for more questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you very much.